Hello everybody, in this video lecture we will cover urinary system. So this is chapter 25, part 1. So the major organs of the urinary system will include kidneys, that's our major excretory organs, urinary bladder, that is a temporary storage and reservoir for urine, ureters, we have right and left ureter, and they transport urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder, and urethra transports urine out of the body. So on this diagram you can see position of the kidneys, a right kidney, a left kidney, you can see the ureters and a urinary bladder right here. So that's on this diagram you see a diagram of a female internal anatomy. So female has urinary bladder, the most anterior organ, then posterior to urinary bladder is uterus and then rectum. Also because the major job of your kidney to filter the blood and remove waste products from the blood. Kidney are very vascular organ, and you see these arteries and veins that enter and leave the kidneys, and those are renal arteries and renal veins. Also on the top of each kidney you see adrenal gland. So kidney functions: removal of toxins, metabolic waste, and excess ions from the blood, regulation of blood volume, regulation of chemical composition of blood and pH of blood, gluconeogenesis, it's a synthesis of glucose from not carbohydrates, right? So synthesis of glucose during prolonged fasting. Kidneys also have endocrine function, so they release two important hormones, renin, and renin regulate blood pressure and kidney function. And what renin does, renin actually raises the blood pressure. And erythropoietin, this hormone regulates production of RBCs, red blood cells or erythrocytes. Also a function of kidney to activate vitamin D. So kidneys are retroperitoneal in a superior lumbar region. Right kidney is lower than the left, and this is because on the right side we have pretty big organ, liver, and liver kind of pushes right kidney a little bit lower. Kidneys have convex lateral surface and concave medial surface. Renal hilum leads to renal sinus, and ureters, renal blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves enter and exit at this hilum. So if you look at this diagram, keep in mind that this is posterior view. Because that's a posterior view, this is the right kidney, and here's the liver. So you're looking at this person from behind. So that would be the left kidney, right kidney. So you can see that's the last rib over here, right? So that's kidney in this region that is superior or upper lumbar region. And the hilum, it's not shown over here, but in this area where you see the ureter exit the kidney, right? In the same area we would have blood vessels that enter and exit, lymphatic vessels goes in, right, and out, nerves. So that would be a hilum right here at this point and this point here. So kidneys are covered by supportive connective tissue, and it has several layers of supporting tissue: renal fascia, renal fascia anchoring outer layer of dense fibrous connective tissue, perirenal fat capsule, fatty cushion, and fibrous capsule that prevents spread of infection to kidneys. So pretty much this is the most superficial, and then we go deep and deep. So on this diagram, you can see location of the kidneys and this connective tissue layers surrounding the kidney. So let me see if I can pick up the color. For some reason before I couldn't. Okay, yeah. So that would cover kidneys over here, right? Just adherents to a kidney itself. This is the fibrous capsule, right? So over here, that's the fibrous capsule. So the deepest layer. Then this yellow part here, right? So that's yellow part. That's fat capsule. So I cannot see it. Right there, fat capsule. And then this, like a brown structure, that's our fascia. And this is posterior renal fascia. And in the anterior side, you would have anterior renal fascia. So here's renal fascia, the most superficial fibrous layer. Then we have fat capsule, so renal fascia over here. Fat capsule deeper to renal fascia, and fibrous capsule is the deepest layer. And also in this picture you can see the kidneys are retroperitoneal because that's our peritoneal cavity, right? So here we have this membrane over here, right? So this membrane that is parietal peritoneum, and organs are removed, but kidneys are behind, right? So they are retroperitoneal. Now, internal anatomy. So if you look at the kidney, we can divide it into renal cortex. So that part is the renal cortex. And now this part over here is the renal medulla. Then a kidney can be divided into lobes. So now this part over here, the same as this is called renal pyramids. Between renal pyramids, we have renal columns. So this area over here, this would be a renal column, right? So here's another renal column right here, right? And here's a big one, like this part. That's a renal column. And this part, as I already showed you, this or this, those are renal pyramids. So now the lobe, it's an area, it's half of the renal column on one side and half of the renal column on another side, right? So that's this part over here, this is one lobe. Now at the tip of a pyramid, right, this one, this tip of each pyramid, this is called papilla. And a renal pelvis is this structure over here. So that's a structure right over here. That's a renal pelvis. Funnel-shaped tube with the renal sinus and within renal sinus. So renal sinus is this part over here, this part over here. All right, so again, cortex, it's a superficial region. So here's the cortex. So it's a granular superficial region. Renal medulla, would be all region over here, right? So including kind of all this part. Lobe, so lobe is this part, so that's a lobe. Papilla would be these things over here, that's a papilla. And renal pelvis is this part over here. So that's a renal pelvis that located within the renal sinus, and this area here, that's a renal sinus. Okay, let me see if I can clean up all this mess. Erase all link. Okay, so good. So if you look at the renal sinus, right, you will find calyces, and we have major calyces and minor calyces, and calyces are branching channels of the renal pelvis that collect urine from minor calyces and empty urine into the pelvis. So urine flows from the pelvis to ureter. So on this diagram, I'm going to show you major calyx, minor calyx, and so on, that what we just discussed previously, right? So again, this part over here, this is the cortex, right? Then inside is medulla, and here's the renal pelvis. But if you look over here, see how renal pelvis is branching into several tubes, right? So this like bigger tube, this is the major calyx, and then major calyx branch into smaller tubes that is called minor calyces, right? So like this is a minor calyx. So actually, maybe if you look to the right, so this area here, this is pyramid, and tip of the pyramid is the papilla, and each papilla enter into minor calyx. So that's, now let me pick up this. So that's area over here, that's a minor calyx, right? Here's another minor calyx. And when they join together, right, here we even have 3, so that would be our over here major calyx. And then major calyces bring urine into pelvis, so that this area over here, this will be pelvis. So when urine is formed, again, let me erase all this stuff, and I'm gonna pick up the pointer. So urine is formed by nephrons, and nephrons is located inside the cortex, and some of them go down to pyramids. But what you see, these lines inside pyramids, those are collecting ducts. So these collecting ducts bring urine right into the minor calyx, then into major calyx, then into pelvis, and from pelvis to the ureter, and from ureter to urinary bladder, urethra, and outside of the body. So nephrons. Nephrons are structural and functional units that form urine. We have about 1 million per kidney, and nephron has 2 major parts. Glomerulus, that is a network of capillaries, and renal tubule. And renal tubules begins with glomerular capsule or Bowman's capsule surrounding the glomerulus, and then we have other parts of this tubule that we will discuss in a minute. But if you look at this diagram on the right, so you see this kind of like round yellow structure. This is called a renal corpuscle. And inside this renal corpuscle, so you see this one is open here, right? So inside this renal corpuscle, we have a network of capillaries that is called glomerulus, right? So, nephron, the major part of nephron would be this glomerulus over here. and then all those tubes, right? So including this one and this one and this, right? So it's all tubings. And then this bigger one over here, this is called collecting duct. So if you look at this diagram, might be maybe a little bit better representation. So here's the blood vessel, right? So here's the arteriole. So arteriole enters the glomerular capsule, and you see how it branches into capillaries. So all these capillaries, they're called glomerulus. So glomerulus is that network of capillaries inside this capsule, but the capsule itself, right, the capsule, this yellow part, is called glomerular capsule. Now together, the capsule and glomerulus called renal corpuscle. Right, so what is renal corpuscle? Renal corpuscle is a structure that is made from glomerulus inside, right, that network of capillaries, and glomerular capsule. So together they make renal corpuscle. Now, so blood vessels gonna bring blood inside this corpuscle. So I'm gonna get my pointer back again. So we're gonna bring blood here inside this glomerular capsule, and then blood is filtered out. Well, not the blood, but plasma, right? I would say plasma, and lots of stuff that is inside the plasma filter out inside this cup, and then we call it filtrate. So then filtrates start passing down through these tubes. And this first tube is called proximal convoluted tubule. Now filtrate goes down and then up, and this loop over here is called loop of Henle or loop of Nephron. So filtrates continue going up, and then it's enter another tubule, and this is called distal convoluted tubule because it's further away from the capsule. And then filtrate enters this tube that is called collecting duct. So we call it filtrate inside these tubules, but when filtrate enters collecting duct, we call it urine. And this is the structure of nephron, and nephron is structural and functional unit of kidney. So here, renal corpuscle, we already talked about it. Renal corpuscle is glomerulus and its glomerular capsule, right? So here's our arteriole. It's called afferent arteriole. So the blood moving in, and then it's, branching to these capillaries, right? This arteriole branch into capillaries. So these capillaries inside are called glomerulus, and it's surrounding by its own capsule that is called glomerular capsule. So together they make renal corpuscle. Now this glomerulus, it has fenestrated endothelium. That means it's very porous. So lots of stuff can filter out inside this capsule and then start moving through the tubules. So because it's fenestrated, that means has big pores, it allows filtrate to pass from plasma into the capsule. Now, if you look at glomerular capsule, if you look at this capsule itself, so it will have parietal layer. So that's a parietal layer, those cells over here. And it will have visceral layer. And visceral layer are these yellow cells, and those cells are called podocytes. So you can see this is the visceral layer, and we have this podocytes are shown here in yellow, and this is parietal layer of the capsule, and this is like simple squamous epithelium. Now, renal tubule. From the renal corpuscle, we're moving to the proximal convoluted tubule, PCT, And cells that make this tubule are cuboidal cells. So you can see them right here. So the cuboidal cells with very dense microvilli, and function is reabsorption and secretion. Now we're moving down, loop of Henle, and loop of Henle has descending loop and ascending loop. Descending goes down, ascending goes up, and it has thick and thin segment. So if it's a thin segment, then we have simple squamous epithelium, and it's freely permeable to water, and thick segment, cuboidal or columnar cells. Now we're moving to distal convoluted tubule, or DCT, and it's made from cuboidal cells. So here's the cells with few microvilli and function more in secretion than reabsorption, right? And then collecting duct. So collecting duct receive filtrate from many nephrons. So this like little parts here. This is where other nephrons gonna bring their filtrate. So fuse together to deliver urine through papilla into minor calyces. So collecting duct goes down to the pyramids, and then we will have papilla and minor calyces. So in the collecting duct, we have two major cells. We have principal cells and intercalated cells. And intercalated cells, they have this microvilli, and they function in an acid-base balance. And principal cells, they regulate salt and water balance. So acid-base, intercalated, and water and salt principal cells. So over here, everything that we just discussed put together, right? Different type of epithelium, right? And different parts of the tubules. So we have two major type of nephrons. Most nephrons, about 85%, they are cortical nephrons. So if you look over here, so let me pick up this color. So that's the cortex of the kidney, right? And this is medulla. And this nephron over here, it mostly located within the cortex. And so that's called cortical nephron. So cortical nephron, 85%, almost entirely in the cortex. And another type of nephron is juxtamedullary nephron. And juxtamedullary nephron shown right here. So this is the nephron that has very long loop of Henle or loop of nephron, and it goes deep into medulla. And this one important in the production of concentrated urine. Right? Okay, let me pick up my pointer again. So on this diagram, well, that's a lot of stuff over here, so you guys can either stop your video, read about it, but that's a cortical nephron shown over here, and this is juxtamedullary nephron with a very long loop of Henle or loop of nephron that goes deep into medulla. Now we're going to talk about a blood supply of the nephron, right? So what we covered so far, we said that nephron is made from glomerulus, right, and tubules, but we need lots of capillaries because this is where stuff goes from the tubule into the capillaries, from the capillaries into the tubule. So you pretty much regulate what needs to be removed from your body, what needs to stay in your blood plasma. So it will be lots of blood vessels surrounding nephrons. So the first we have this blood vessel, right? And it's called afferent arteriole. So afferent arteriole brings blood to the capsule. And then from the capsule, right, in the capsule, we have capillaries, glomerulus, and from glomerulus to efferent arteriole, right? So glomerulus itself is specialized for filtration. Blood pressure is high because this efferent arteriole that leaving the capsule is smaller in a diameter than efferent. So we have like a bigger, not big, that's still very small, bigger blood vessels bringing blood in and a smaller vessel taking blood out. So that's why pressure is pretty high. Now, this efferent arterioles then branch into capillaries. So you see all these pinkish lines. This is called peritubular capillaries. Peritubular means a round tubule. And they have low pressure, porous capillaries adapted for absorption, arise from efferent arterioles, and they cling to adjacent renal tubules in cortex and empty into venules. Right, so that's peritubular capillaries. And another type of blood vessel is called Vasa Recta. So Vasa Recta are long vessels parallel to long loops of Henle. It arise from efferent arterioles of juxtamedullary nephrons and function formation of concentrated urine. So it's right here. So this is our juxtamedullary nephron because it has long loop that goes deep into medulla, and what covers this loop is Vasa Recta. Now we also mentioned that kidneys have large blood supply, so it's about 1200 milliliters. So it's a quarter of all cardiac output goes to a kidney each minute. And this blood vessel here, this is abdominal aorta, and here's the branches from abdominal aorta called right and left renal arteries. And then when we cleanse this blood, we filter out everything that we don't want to keep, then blood goes back through this blue vessel shown here, and this is right and left renal veins to this big blood vessel that is inferior vena cava. Okay, on this diagram you can see the illustration of major blood vessels. So let me pick up the pen. So here's renal artery, right? So blood enters the kidney. And then renal artery is divided into several branches like this one over here, this is called segmental arteries. So that's a segmental arteries. So we go from the renal artery, go to segmental arteries. Then segmental arteries continue over here between the lobes and over here or over here, right over here. And this is called interlobar artery, right, between the lobes. And then they make these turns, right, so like over here or over there. And they look like arches. So they run in a border between the cortex and medulla, and this is called arcuate artery. So they do look like arches. And what's radiate? So this is this one over here. We have these arteries that radiate from the arcuate artery, and we call it radiate artery, cortical radiate artery. Right, and then when we pick up the blood that was already cleaned, we start pretty much with similarities, right? So here we have radiate veins. So we have radiate artery, we have radiate veins, we have arcuate artery, we have arcuate vein, and then we have interlobar artery, interlobar vein. The only thing we don't have segmental veins. We do have segmental arteries. and then it's all blood vessels come together and form this renal vein. This is a diagram that explains the picture that we just covered, right? So that's how blood flows through kidneys, from aorta to renal artery, segmental artery, interlobar, between the lobes, arcuate, look like an arch, then radiate artery, because they radiate from arcuate artery, and then efferent arteriole, glomerulus, that's our capillaries, efferent arteriole, peritubular capillaries, and Vasa Recta, and we're skipping this, which one? Segmental, right? So we will not have segmental, but here we have cortical artery, cortical radiate vein, arcuate artery, arcuate vein, interlobar artery, interlobar vein, and we don't have segmental vein. So we go straight to renal vein, renal artery, renal vein, and inferior vena cava. Juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is the structure that actually regulate filtration, and it's, as a result, it's regulate blood volume and blood pressure. So it's a special structure, one per nephron, that is important in regulation of filtrate formation and blood pressure. And it involves modified portion of the distal part of the ascending limb of Henle and efferent and sometimes efferent arterioles. So it's actually located in this area right here, right? So this is JGA. Now, if we look at JGA in a more detail, we would see that we have these cells shown here kind of in a green color, right? Like this or this. And this is called granular cells. I like this name granular cells because it tells you it has some granules, and when we have granules means we secrete something. So those granules secrete renin, so they contain renin. There is another name for these granular cells, juxtaglomerular or JG cells, and they are enlarged and modified smooth muscle cells of the arteriole. And what they do, they secrete renin, and they also mechanoreceptors that sense blood pressure, right? So granular cells are these cells, right, that are modified smooth muscle cells on the efferent and sometimes efferent arteriole. Then we have these cells over here, right, these cells, and they called macula densa. Macula densa are tall, closely packed cells of the ascending limb of loop of Henle, and they are chemoreceptors. They chemoreceptors that sense concentration of sodium chloride. Right. So again, that's our juxtaglomerular apparatus, and we have granular cells and macula densa cells. So this diagram, you also guys just can see it maybe a little bit different, but this is a macula densa that are chemoreceptors, and this is a granular cell over here and over here. And those are cells that are that are mechanoreceptors, so they sense change in the blood pressure and also secrete renin. Now, filtration membrane. What is the filtration membrane? So if you look at this diagram over here, so that's our efferent arteriole. So the blood enters this glomerulus. So here's the blood flowing through those capillaries, right? And if you see like these little dots, right? This is some substances inside blood plasma. Some of them we want to keep, let's say amino acid, maybe proteins, maybe some glucose, right? So some of them we want to keep. Some of these dots are waste product, and we need to get rid of them. So they need to move from the blood plasma inside these tubules, right, and hopefully excreted from the body, right? So now filtration membrane is the structure here, right, that these molecules need to pass through, because filtration happens in this capsule, right? And for substances to go from the plasma inside the tubules, there is some physical barriers over here, and that's a filtration membrane. So it's a porous membrane between the blood and capsular space, and it consists of endothelium of the glomerular capillaries. I'm getting my pointer again. So because these blood vessels, right, they have walls. And because those are capillaries, these cells that make these walls called endothelium. It's a simple squamous epithelial cells. So that will be this endothelium of the capillaries. Then it will be visceral membrane of the glomerular capsule. That's membrane over here. And between them, we will have basement membrane. It's a fused basal lamina of two other layers. On the next slide, we can see it better. So on this diagram, you can see three parts of the filtration membrane. So this is the capillary with blood plasma, and this is the capsule, Bowman's capsule or glomerular capsule. And substances from plasma need to move inside this capsule, and they need to go through this structure. First, it will be endothelium of the capillaries, right, shown here in blue. Then it's gonna be these food processes of podocytes, and this is the parietal layer of the glomerular capsule. So that's the cells, podocytes, and their feed. So they need to go through them, and in between them is the basement membrane. Right, so that's three parts of the filtration membrane. So filtration membrane allows passage of water and solutes smaller than most plasma protein. Fenestration prevents filtration of blood cells, and negatively charged basement membrane repels large ions such as plasma proteins. Also, slit diaphragm also help to repel macromolecules. Well, if this is you think like too much, just remember that filtration membrane allows small molecules to move from the plasma to the capsule, and large molecules such as large proteins and of course blood cells to stay inside capillaries. Okay, so that's it for part 1, and hope it was helpful.